Another piece that I think is sometimes helpful for all of us, and it's a little bit of a mantra that I've used, and I certainly can't take ownership for it, but that is to have people think about this, and that is, better to prepare the child for the path than the path for the child.
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast, where we explore the people, ideas, and stories that shape the way we teach, learn, and grow. I'm your host, Jason Buccheri, and today I'm thrilled to bring you a conversation with Sean Nosek, the superintendent of the Abbotsford School District in British Columbia, Canada. So I've known Sean for over a decade, going back to his time in the West Vancouver School District. Even early in his career, Sean stood out as a leader, someone who brought thoughtfulness and care to every project we worked on together. From digital curriculum implementations to more complex system-wide initiatives, Sean has always been a deep thinker with a clear focus on school culture and the communities he serves. But what I admire most about Sean is his deep interest in people, ideas, and art, all of which are beautifully showcased in his poignant and heart-rending book, Ken Foster's Vancouver, Life, Art, and Alleyways. Foster's story is as remarkable as his artwork, and Sean's collaboration in bringing it to life is both fascinating and deeply moving. I mention this because, in short, Sean is exactly the kind of leader I'd want in my community, and I'd bet you would too. Abbotsford is as fortunate to have him as Sean is to serve a district that mirrors his values of diversity, equity, and opportunity. Sean is deeply committed to fostering a vibrant and diverse school system that not only ensures every student and family feels supported and valued, but one that is also at the cutting edge in terms of educational quality. In our conversation, we explore what makes great teaching and the inspirational moments that have shaped Sean's career. We dive into the evolving role of technology in education, from the potential of AI to transform personalized learning, to the necessity of maintaining the human richness that lies at the heart of all great teaching. Sean also shares his thoughts on equity, resilience, and the vital role of community in fostering supportive learning environments. Sean's perspective is grounded not only in his professional journey, but also in his identity as a father, a global citizen, and someone who cares deeply about the role education plays in shaping lives and societies. From his reflections on Canada's international reputation in education to his thoughts on what the future holds, Sean brings insights that will resonate with anyone passionate about learning. So grab a coffee, settle in, and join me for this conversation with Sean Nosek. Sean Nosek, welcome to the podcast. For those that can't see you right now, can you tell us where this podcast finds you?
Absolutely, yeah. First of all, Jason, nice to see you this morning. I am in beautiful Abbotsford, British Columbia. Abbotsford is, maybe an hour east of Vancouver, in the heart of the beautiful Fraser Valley.
Excellent. And for those that can't see you, you have this wonderful background of the Abbotsford School District. So with that, Sean, can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing currently?
Yeah, so I'm in my second year as a superintendent of schools for the Abbotsford School District, a wonderful, vibrant community. We're doing a lot of exciting things here, but maybe just to contextualize for listeners, one of the neat things about Abbotsford is its diversity. We've been recognized as one of the most diverse communities actually in all of Canada. At last count, we were closing in on 90 different languages spoken in our schools. We're a school district of about 20,000 students. I mean, we've crossed that threshold. We're not quite at 21,000, about 46 schools. We have a very vibrant and dense central core, but we've also got some schools on the edges of the community that would be considered more rural and smaller schools. So really neat place to work and learn.
Well, I certainly want to dive into not only your experience in Abbotsford, but in BC in general. But before we get there, I always want the audience to learn a little bit about the practitioners of our education system. And so I'd like to start with some questions about how you grew up and where you grew up. So, what was childhood like? Where was it? And any stories about what it was like growing up as Sean Nosek?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was born and raised in what we call here the Lower Mainland. I was born in North Vancouver, and at a very young age, my family moved to a city called Port Coquitlam. And if you grew up in Port Coquitlam, you very quickly refer to it as Poco. So I am a Poco
Mm.
kid from way back. That's where I did my elementary and secondary schooling. I graduated from Terry Fox Secondary School. I had like a wonderful childhood. I'm a child of the '70s, so it was the generation of getting on our bikes and not coming home until dinner time. There seemed to be lots of natural places. I remember spending hours in forests, hanging out with friends, um, and great community, and it was a really rich childhood for me.
That's awesome. So shout out to all the fellow Poco kids. I can't believe all the time I spent in the Lower Mainland. I haven't heard that before. So want to hear some more stories about growing up Poco. But
Yeah, there you go. That's another podcast.
that's a whole nother show. Um, but that's actually this next question actually might be a connection to that upbringing. What was your education like in that area? Any aspects of it stand out to you now?
Yeah, I'm one of these people that has a pretty good memory. I remember all of my teachers right from kindergarten, and I remember being very engaged and interested in school, particularly in K to 7. Um, and so this was I guess an evolving time in education, and I say that because one of my earliest memories was my kindergarten teacher, and when I approached her with a knot in my shoes. She pulled out this little thing on her desk and had me put my hand on it and slapped me. I think as a way of, suggesting that I better learn to not have knots in my shoes if I was tying them and untying them. And at the time, that's just kind of how you rolled. There was no corporal punishment or anything beyond that, but it's sort of
Mhm.
remnants of another time where that would never happen today. But for the most part, kind, committing teachers, lots of opportunities. I remember being, participating in, track and field and cross country at elementary school, and then moved to a junior high school model. And I remember, being a little bit intimidated that, first days and weeks, going to school then. But again, really found it a great community. I was able to participate in a lot of the athletic programs. I love the drama program. And after junior high, moved to high school. And then, and I think this is a phenomenon that we see in a lot of data, even across Canada. But I became rather disengaged. You'd like to think it would go the other way, but I think by the time I
Mm.
hit the big high school, and I want to say there was maybe, at least in my recollection, we might have had 2,000 students in just a couple of grades. I mean, it was a big school. My numbers may be off. And so I remember just sort of feeling a little bit like, coming through a system where you were seen, heard, and valued to being a little bit sort of anonymous.
Mm.
And also the actual learning experience, I didn't love as much either.
Mm. So through all that, do you remember what you really first loved learning? What was the first thing that you said, like, I can't get enough of this. I wanna learn more. I want to dive deeper.
Yeah, I mean, I'll share maybe a couple of things. So, and I think this is true of maybe most people in general. As children, you're interested in almost everything, right? Why is the sky blue? Why does that happen? I'd love to know more. And I sort of soaked it all in. And for some reason, that natural curiosity and inquisitiveness that I think exists in human beings fades over time. And maybe
Mm.
schools own some of that. Maybe they own a lot. So here's an example I'll give on the other side. And I don't mean this to sound critical, it's just more a reflection on my own experience. So I'm now in chemistry 11. and it's the first day or second day of chemistry, and the chemistry teacher hands out a paper copy of the periodic table, as I remember, and says, go home and memorize it. You're going to need to know all of this in order to pass this class. And sort of as things went, just everything got very, technical. And so, chemical equations, and I remember something about moles, 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd or negative 23rd. In any event, for me, I had a lot of trouble engaging in the class. And as an adult, I think, if at the beginning, in that moment where the periodic table was being handed out, instead of just saying, hey, this is a bunch of kind of numbers and letters that you need to memorize, if it was like, hey, this is a menu of all the basic ingredients that make up the entire universe, and the way that they might combine with each other or blend explains everything. So if you can figure out these, it's like the mystery of mysteries. And I thought, not that I'm a chemistry teacher, but if I was, I might spend a little more time on that hook, on really trying to, paint a picture around what's possible and why learn this in the first place. And so that's something that I think sort of stuck with me, and I try to carry that with me as I engage even in the work that I do as a superintendent. How can we actually engage, compel, invite people into the work we're doing?
So what was the hook? Like, you obviously, you just described your struggles in high school. You obviously didn't drop out. You went on to be a teacher, a principal, and then all the administrative roles. What was it that got your attention, that made you want to stick around in education?
Yeah, so first of all, I didn't go right to university. I was going to take a gap year, and I'd always been interested in, the artists and literature and philosopher. And so I had this crazy idea that I'd take a gap year and take a stab at writing the great Canadian novel. Well, that never happened. But what did happen was I ended up, flipping burgers full time, spending a lot of late nights out, and realized I really should probably get back to school. This doesn't seem like it's a path that's going to lead to anywhere excellent anytime soon, at least for me. And met a girl who wanted to go back to school, wanted to be a teacher. And so that was an extra compulsion. And it really was as simple and general as, well, I've always loved the big themes of life. Why don't I study literature and see what unfolds? And so of the career paths that unfold for people who might pursue a path in literature and philosophy, I did also minor in kinesiology, by the way. I realized, well, actually, I could apply to law school. That was one path, and I actually did write my LSAT. But I also applied to teacher college, as did my then girlfriend and now wife, and I got on that journey and just loved it so much that there was no looking back.
So it's Mrs. Nosek we have to thank for all the work you're doing now.
She would love to hear you say that.
Well, we'll make sure we share this with her. Well, as a fellow philosophy and literature major, I always am very intrigued by folks that have chosen this area of study. What were your big influences when you went into university?
It almost sounds a little cheesy to talk about, Jay, but I remember being introduced to what our professor at the time referred to as the existentialists in this one particular philosophy course. And so, this was sort of a look at the work from everybody from Camus and Sartre and Kierkegaard and so on, Nietzsche. And I remember sort of having a bit of this mind blown feeling. And I think what I really liked was some of the conversations were the most fundamental. Like, what is the purpose of life? What in fact gives life meaning in the first place? And while I don't purport to have an answer that I want to suggest applies to anybody else, but I think part of it is often engaging in meaningful work, something bigger than yourself, is a way of at least having a sense that life has some meaning. And so I've always been drawn from there, not only to the work of philosophers, but to this idea of meaningful work. of being able to maybe help even make the world a better place in some small, simple way.
I think that's beautiful, and I think that's reflecting a lot of the work that you're doing, and certainly in the disposition you're talking about that I think you want educators to have. Is there anything that you would change about your own education? Maybe you reference in high school being disengaged, but is there anything beyond that you would suggest is different now, or that you would have changed in terms of how you went to school?
Well, certainly, I'm thankful for the journey that I've had, because, I don't think I would be where I am today were it not for the different twists and turns. I think in hindsight, for example, the anecdote I shared recently about chemistry, well, I shouldn't put all of that on the teacher. I mean, I think we also have the ability, and it's also something I try to remind myself around, to be curious and inquisitive, even if at first it might not seem particularly compelling. I think most things, if you kind of spend a moment to scratch beneath the surface, are fascinating. One thing, or maybe another thing, Jay, that I will is, I remember being, frankly, intimidated by shop class, back in the day. Now, as an adult, not that I suggest I'm very good at those things, but I am fascinated, by them. And so if I could go back and learn shops in a wood class and a metal shop, et cetera, I would eat that up. I mean, what a great opportunity.
So if we kind of pivot now to look at your, role in education over the last 25 years, is that about right?
Yeah, even more, but yes.
Even more, give or take.
Give or take, I like it.
What would you describe as the most inspiring things you've seen or been part of?
Well, great question. I'm in a field of work that in some ways has some baked in moments of inspiration. So, here's one that stands out for me, Jay, and I can't even remember what year, but a highlight for me, of course, is to be able to stand on a stage at graduation time and, shake the hands of our graduates, see the proud families, and sort of even take that moment and reflect and think, this is the product of our work. This might be a journey that a student has taken with us from kindergarten or even pre-K, and it's a big moment. But a moment that stands out more specifically around that, was a student that I remember, spent his school days in a wheelchair. A popular, well-liked student, but had this particular challenge, and so to everybody's surprise, this student had found the gumption, the fortitude to step out of that wheelchair and walk across the stage at graduation. And so that was something that I don't think most of us had seen before or expected. But not just the moment in and of itself, for the student, which was extraordinary, but to see like almost uproarious applaud and cheering from peers and families, that really stood out for me, because I thought, we're not just making differences or hoping to make differences for individuals like that student, but to build better communities. And so it was a moment where it's like, what, we've done right, not just by this student, but by this community who is wanting to share and celebrate this special moment. So that really stands out for me.
That's a beautiful example. So you mentioned that aspect of community and the community, rooting for and being inspired by this student. Who are the most significant people at a district that build this community in your mind?
Mm-hmm. We have a saying here, and that it takes all of us. And so I think an easy answer would be, our teachers are the bread and butter of the system. I mean, they're spending the day with their students. It's the core of our business, the teaching and learning. But the truth is, there might be a student who the first adult that he or she encounters that day, besides maybe a parent, and maybe not even a parent, might be the bus driver that picks them up. And so the potential of that meaningful interaction and how it might set the course of a day, or you're a crossing guard, and that a kind word could make all the difference. And so I like to think, and maybe it's just the nature of the work that I do in the position that I'm in, that each and every one of us gets an opportunity to try to make a profound impact.
So when you look at that impact in the classroom specifically, what do the best classrooms look like, sound like, feel like?
I love this question. I love to see a classroom that is engaged. I appreciate that there are moments where it might be appropriate for there to be, silence and focus. Maybe there's more of a traditional examination or something happen. But increasingly, learning does not typically look quiet and still and in silence. It looks engaged. There's movement, there's talking, hands-on activity, a feeling of safety, dare I say, even of joy. And that's what I love to see in our classrooms.
So how hard is it to create that systemically?
Hmm. Well, I think it's really your question gets to, how do you build culture? Because, what we don't do is sort of walk into each classroom and say, here's what you need to do, and nor would that work. But I think if you are, as I try to be, intentional about the kind of culture you want to create,
Mm-hmm.
and you have the ability to create that for the people who are then charged with creating those kinds of cultures in their own spaces. So the work, for example, that we do with our principals and vice principals, who in turn are leading our 46 schools and do have that direct impact on all of the school-based employees, and the ability to have an influence, the ability to engage them. And so, strategically, that's how we try to do that work and how we try to have alignment, right, if you will, from the governance level of a strategic plan all the way down to an individual student's experience in a classroom on any given day.
Yeah, so I love that answer, Sean, because I think a lot of folks they almost want to view education as separate and distinct from society, right? So I ask these questions just to give a flavor of like, of course, all this is about culture and community. It's like it's not any different than moving, a local political group or even on a bigger scale, the nation's identity. It's like these are not easy things to build and to foster. So you just mentioned principals and obviously teachers. What are the qualities that you most admire in those folks to build such a culture?
There are a couple that come to mind like right away. First one, I love to pick up a sense of enthusiasm for the work. I love people who are passionate and committed, and I think that comes across. You can see it in the way people engage in their work, and you can hear it when you speak with them. So that's one. And the other that I would say is flexibility. This is a word we throw around a lot. Be flexible. But I do think that it is easy, and maybe even easier as the years go by, in some ways to just get a little bit more entrenched in our ways. We get used to how we like things, how we've done it. We think it's working. But of course, we're living in a world that is constantly evolving. You think about the technological advances, you think about the changes in some of our community dynamics, et cetera, et cetera. And so flexibility is a real big one for me.
Hmm. Is BC struggling like here in Ontario with turning out folks to be principals?
Yeah, I mean, in Abbotsford, thankfully, we've been able to retain and recruit, wonderful vice principals and principals. But do we certainly see that, for example, the number of applications that are coming in when we have a posting out do not seem to be the same that we might have seen even 5 years ago? For sure we do. And, I think that's multifaceted. There's a labor shortage going on across this country. We see it. That could be true if you're hiring, restaurant workers or skilled labor, just about pick a sector, and that will be the case. But I do think that we want to make sure, and this is true, I suppose, for almost anything in education, but that, the work that our vice principals and principals do is appealing and looks appealing so that teachers, in fact, would see that as something aspirational, and not all teachers,
Mm-hmm.
but enough that would say, I see in here an opportunity to help lead and shift and engage with the broader community and move it forward in some meaningful ways.
Yeah. So why, I, again, this is just anecdotal. So forgive me if you don't feel this is the case, especially in BC and in particular in Abbotsford. But a lot of the really good educators that I know have very little interest in being principals or
Yeah.
district leaders. Um, what would you say to those folks that like they have those qualities, but they, for whatever reason, might not be interested in it from the outside?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the question, because I would encourage those folks who might have an opinion about how they think it looks or how it might be to be in a vice principal or principal role to go and have a conversation, at a coffee break or after school one day. Just say, hey, so tell me what it's like to be a vice principal. Or even more specifically, let me say, like, tell me what are the 5 best things about being a vice principal? What do you love about your work? And same thing with the principal, because it might not be obviously apparent when during the course of a school day you'll pass in, well, it looks like they're in a heavy duty meeting with a parent that might be upset about something, or a student who was misbehaving, and there's a hard conversation happening there, or managing the complexities of staff and scheduling. But the truth is, there is a lot of rich and rewarding elements to that kind of leadership. And so I would encourage people to seek that out if it doesn't seem obvious on the surface.
And when it comes to a superintendency or even like a senior administrative role, what do you wish more people, the broader public, the parents in your community, what do you wish they knew about the role that maybe you don't know till you're in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part people do know, but I guess I would say, um, generally speaking, everybody is doing the best they can with the best intentions.
Mm,
I think from time to time we encounter people who come to a system prepared to fight. Whether it's stories about, a newspaper article that they read about a lack of supports, or that, there's not enough funding in the system, or what have you. And so I think it's potentially easy, depending on what you read and what social media might tell you, to enter a school system with this idea that you need to be a bit combative, that you need to sort of fight your way through it. But the truth is, it's working together that's always been the best path forward. And as a system, we are committed to doing the very best for our students. And while we don't always have the answers, I think we're always prepared to make sure that we're doing our very best to find those answers when we don't have them.
mm,
And another piece that I think is sometimes helpful for all of us, and it's a little bit of a mantra that I've used, and I certainly can't take ownership for it, but that is, to have people think about this, and that is, better to prepare the child for the path than the path for the child.
mm, mm,
And so in education circles, over the last decade or so, there's lots of talk around, things like helicopter parenting and sort of micro parenting or bulldozer
mhm,
parenting, these sort of expressions.
mhm,
And I get it, that I think we all want the best for our children. And so this notion of, trying to clear every obstacle so that everything is just smooth and simple, well intentioned. But the truth is, what we actually want to do is prepare students to be able to navigate obstacles and complexities and difficulties, because life, I guarantee you, will be filled with them.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I can make it more strongly as a parent. That I can see by and large, I'm from a community probably not too dissimilar in Abbotsford. I mean, like certainly middle class part of my community, in which parents want to make everything as easy as possible for their kids. And I've had a lot of really positive reinforcement around my kids. It's like, oh, they're so great. Like, don't be too tough on them. Like when they see me, kind of reining them in or whatever. And it's like, well, they're great. They're not great kids totally by accident. You know what I mean? My wife and I have really made the concerted effort to let them fail, to challenge them, to allow them to, despite our inclinations, ride their bikes when they're very young across the neighborhood, and sit at home and be anxious. It's like that was our burden to bear, right? And I don't feel enough
Right.
parents are doing that. Do you see any ways in which maybe you want to talk to the BC system as a whole? Because I know there's a lot of outdoor initiatives going on, or to what you're doing in Abbotsford that's helping not only parents really understand this, but even more importantly, for, creating some resilience, I think is the word, creating some resilience in terms of behaviors for students.
Yeah, for sure. Listening to Jay, and I appreciate, by the way, some of your parenting style that you shared there. I'm a supporter. You probably heard this expression, like bubble wrapped kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in different ways at schools and even in the classroom, when we can work with our families to have them feel that their children are in fact safe. And so, that a West Coast recess when it's raining is absolutely fine. And that generally speaking, for most children, they don't need to go inside. And that some
Hallelujah,
form of
Sean.
play that
Hallelujah.
might involve, yeah, it might involve, some simple basic climbing or a little bit of tumbling, and I say that, carefully. We're not talking about anything dangerous.
Right.
But again, these are how bodies and minds learn and grow. And I come back to that silly quote. We can't just look to eliminate all the obstacles on the path, or we're actually not doing our job.
Yeah, I love that. I really do. Um, so maybe in lieu of that, preparing the student for the path, what are the areas that a superintendent can have the most impact in terms of
Mm,
preparing for that student? And maybe I don't want you to focus on that one student, but maybe more on the system.
sure.
Because I feel sometimes, we inherit, like you've inherited a system, and um, and your predecessor, Kevin, who I know well, is a great human being, inherited a system of its own. What are the ways that superintendents can look to, take the really good things in the system, but then keep pushing it to be even better?
I think one of the important things that we have to do is sort of another little saying that I often have is like always be scanning. And
Mm,
so, scan the system. What are we doing well, and what might we do better? And more than that, scan the system so broadly that you might say, what are some of the emerging patterns or themes that we need to be, prepared for? And so, maybe cite just one example, and I probably have several, but I think part of my tenure would be marked by the emergence of AI. And
mm,
so I would say, my impression was it wasn't a system that collectively had done some deep thinking about what that might mean for our sector, whether
mhm,
that's in the classroom or whether that's operationally, as a system running in the background from the classrooms. And so, putting that conversation front and center, demonstrating specific tools and their impact, having people think deeply, engaging actually with our families and parents around that conversation.
mhm,
So I think part of leadership and part of being superintendent of a school district is to be mindful of those kind of societal trends, and then put them in the context of, are we in fact preparing our students for the future that they're entering? And of course, the other one, and our district does such a wonderful job in this case, but that is, particularly in a diverse community, what are the barriers? Who are we not serving well? How do we
mhm,
make sure that we're connecting with, the almost 90 different languages that are spoken in our families? Or if we have families that are having trouble, putting food on the table or accessing community resources,
mhm.
that we're working with community partners and working with our schools to make sure that we're all equipped to be able to leverage that as best we possibly can. And so I think about, we started this school year, and it's a tradition in Abbotsford, with a a back to school kind of backpack program. And I'm just going from memory. I might have the number a little bit off, but the gist of it will be right. I think we had hundreds. I'll just say we had hundreds of families, come and take opportunity to get a backpack filled with school supplies because it wouldn't have been easy for them to otherwise get. And so from that, trying to be visionary around, what the future requires and are we doing it, to the very basics, are we meeting some of the fundamental needs of our students and families? And then I think it's the art of, how do you then communicate that in a cohesive, meaningful way?
So you're kind of touching on obviously communication there, but it's also storytelling. And that's something that I'm very interested in on this podcast is to not only look at the Canadian narrative, the Canadian story, because we don't have a national body of education to try to articulate if there was a story of Canadian education, what would it be? But also, in particular, the narrative about what education should be for, instead of just the engineering of education, of like, how do we learn to read better and how do we improve our numeracy skills? That to me is kind of like the engineering question, is one that everyone tries to answer, but I don't see a lot of people trying to answer this let's put it this way, this more existential question about what is the meaning of education? What should it be? You have any inclinations there as to how you would start forming that story, whether you want to look at it from the Canadian perspective or maybe even a more global perspective?
Well, I love the general gist of the question that you're asking here, and I have so many directions I could take this, but here's what I'll say to start. I think at some level, the core of our work is fundamentally human and more of an art than a science. And so I worry sometimes that if we try to reduce the magic of what a teacher does in a classroom to a series of proven strategies, we're missing something. And that's not I want to be clear, that's not to say that I don't think there are effective and proven strategies. There are. But I think if we take a paint by numbers approach, we've lost it. So I'm going to come back even to the anecdote I shared earlier about learning chemistry. This can be done technically. You can hand out the periodic table. I mean, I know today we have technology and say, memorize it, you're going to need to know it. But I think the 5 or 10 minutes that you might spend on why this is a fascinating topic that might unlock the mysteries of the universe and all its possible incarnations and combinations could be time well spent. So I think where I'm getting to is we have individual human beings, and somewhere inside them they have passions and interests and frustrations and joys. And I think it's our ability to tap into that that's going to bring the best reward. And this is why it's an art, because yes, we have curriculum to make sure that students learn. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we don't spend time there. But I think we also need to spend time on who are we, who are they as human beings, and then how do we find this magic? And so I think we make efforts even in the way, coming back to how we interact with the leaders in our system. It's easy to fall into, look, I'm going to just stand up there, I'm going to deliver some stuff, I'm going to send some emails, just go do it. And there are times where it probably feels to them, but also spending that time on, and you said this, Jay, telling the stories, celebrating the successes, taking a few minutes, when I'm maybe addressing a room of our leaders, maybe 140, 150 of them every month. Well, this is an opportunity to maybe create a memory or a collective experience, or celebrate someone else's success and say, hey, come on up. You had this really cool thing that happened the other day. This was a little spontaneous one, Jay, but back to trying to leverage AI in meaningful ways. And so we had recently had a conversation, shared some tools, and a vice principal shared an anecdote back, and it was so cool. I said, do you mind standing up in front of this group of peers and leaders in the system to share it? And she did. And it was as simple. She said, realizing the possibility of what we can do with translation. I went back to school the next day. We had a newcomer family. They only spoke Swahili, and it was a kindergarten child. And rather than sort of book an appointment, through community services where we'd ultimately get translation, using a combination of a couple different apps, was to take English text, translate it into Swahili, then have the Swahili spoken out loud in a way that a parent could hear. And in 20 minutes, he was able to log in to a school cash system and buy his child a T-shirt that he wanted to, feel like he welcomed and belonged at school. And so it's like a little thing, but, it was like, hey, let's celebrate this. So it went from a concept of AI to, sharing anecdotes of how we're making differences in individual lives. And those are little things that are the big things to me.
Well, I love that. And as I've said on here in the past, I feel that these exact kind of storytelling moments and getting people together as a community to tell these is important. I feel that, when I was teaching, it felt too isolating to me. And I know a lot of teachers, although, the school community is important and it's there, sometimes you get into that rut of seeing the same folks, the same faces every day and not hearing what's going on beyond your walls. Right. So I think that's a really important piece. So if we can look at the, sort of Canadian narrative, you've been to, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was Korea recently, to talk about BC education. So you might have a better perspective than a lot of folks here, to talk about either Canadian, North American education in contrast to what you see globally. Like, what is our story when, from the outside? How are other folks viewing education here?
I don't think it's I don't think that people will be surprised to know that Canada, generally speaking, is so highly regarded for the power and impact of its public education system. And whether that's through different sorts of international assessments that students take, or just from observations and the reputation that I think has been earned over frankly decades. But I sometimes almost want to frame it this way. So I say, look, I'm going to take my school district as an example. I've worked in 3 different school districts, and the stories would be similar. Where else in the world would it be normal to be able to have students speaking and families representing almost 90 different languages, to find avenues in, to normalize that it's not your first language, it might be a second or even a third language, to be an inclusive system that says whatever challenge or diversity or neurodiverse element you may bring, you are welcome into this system. We're going to support you. And still be able to graduate students who, as I said, even on international measures, are able to move on meaningfully in the world by any standard. And so where else in the world? And so having traveled, I had a wonderful experience in Korea, and I got a chance to speak and engage at a global international conference there. I actually got to visit schools, and I think there's a lot of wonderful things that we could learn. But it struck me again, just seeing it, that when we speak about diversity in Canada, I don't think there's a lot of places in the world. There are certainly some places in the world, but not a lot of places in the world that come close. Interestingly, part of the reason I think the Koreans were interested in having me attend was they are, at least in this particular region, experiencing a low birth rate. And so they, like a lot of the Northern Hemisphere, are sort of worried about the ability of replacing the workers and talent once they retire. And so they have a more aggressive and open immigration policy than they've had before. And so their schools are slowly becoming a little bit, if you will, more Canadian like. And so I think it was also a nice boost of confidence to think that around the world, people recognize that we're doing something special.
So, first of all, thanks for sharing that, Sean. What is it that you would recommend to them to build, like systemically? Is it a about like cultures that are, school cultures that are accepting of the other? Like, is that something that we just maybe take for granted in the Canadian public? Like we have this wonderful metaphor, I think a much more useful metaphor for identity than the Americans. We have the mosaic, the example of a mosaic, right? All these different colors and facets making, a bigger image. Whereas the idea of this melting pot where you all melt into some, I don't know, some gumbo of identity that's American. I just think our metaphor is a lot stronger. So is it built into our culture, or are there things we're specifically doing in the systems to facilitate that?
I think it's a combination of all of it. You think about the land that we have as Canadians, like literally just a geographical expanse, the area and our population. And so that was maybe another one of the takeaways for me. You visit a city like Seoul, and what a remarkable and extraordinary city. And so I think, when you're having to attend to that volume of people and community building and education. And so one of the things, again, I think maybe we take for granted in Canada is sort of, access to education and maybe post-secondary, where the academic pressure that students around the world and other places, and in this particular case, I do think of Korea, that feel to, just achieve a high enough level to be able to go on to university is significant. And I don't know that Canadians have an answer for them in that regard. Part of that is they're dealing with different kinds of pressures, than we are. And so I think in some ways we're a reminder that we should really appreciate and value some of the opportunities that we do, because it does not necessarily exist around the world.
So with that, Sean, if I can ask you to look out into, an indeterminate future, say 50 years out, what does education look like to you? And doesn't have to be just positive or just negative. You can say what you're worried about and what you're optimistic about.
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot about this, and I think there's a whole continuum. There's this part of me that goes, at the end of the day, it might not look a whole lot different, probably for our younger learners too. I think working families really like the idea that their younger children have a place that they can go to where they're cared for, where they're learning a sound curriculum that's setting them up for a lifetime of success. But the other part of me says, we coming back to some of the technological advanced themes. How far away are we from a classroom that with the snap of a finger transforms and suddenly it feels like you're underwater, and you're now doing a marine unit, and you can actually, you feel like you're a submarine and you're actually looking at the shark or the octopus, and you snap your fingers again the next day and you're inside a rocket, or you're inside of a human body. And so I absolutely think that technology is going to continue to offer just really powerful opportunities. And I think artificial intelligence has the ability, to do some mass personalized learning if done well, that every student, in their pockets almost. And while we're, in the midst of restricting the use of these mostly across Canada, but at some point we might also say, actually, we need them back, because that's their tutor. And it knows how to break down the math problems. And this student's on quadratic equations. This student's still learning decimals, no problem, because it's like they have an education assistant, a virtual one in their pockets. I don't want to ever think that we would lose the human richness and dialogue, but do I imagine there's a blend of some powerful technologies and human that is going to impact education? I can't help but think that it won't.
Excellent. So if you had a magic wand to change anything in the system at all, what would you make classrooms look like? Or the system, or take it in whatever direction you feel.
Yeah. Wow. I think Canada, like so many nations, we still face some equity barriers. Not every child can afford to have a laptop, for example, that might help them with their studies. But yeah, you imagine what sort of career or post-secondary that wouldn't almost be a required tool. And hard for the system, and while we find creative ways to be able to say, well, here's a laptop for everyone. And similarly, lots of talk around, maybe having a national food program. We recently in British Columbia launched what we call Feeding Futures. And so I think, where I'm going is this idea that if we could close the gaps, where it doesn't matter, what economic background you come from, what part of the world you come from, there's a level playing field, and you can go from here to anywhere. And while I think Canada is maybe better than just about anywhere else already in that regard, there are some disparities. And so we're going to need as a system to keep thinking about how it is that we can attend to that and close some of those gaps. And I would be remiss if I also didn't say that, in the context of truth and reconciliation, and as Canadians, we still have some real important gaps to close when it comes to the success of Indigenous students. And that's true all across our country, and dare I say, around the globe. But I'm proud of the work that we're doing in Abbotsford, and I think even across this country in attending to that. But we have a long way to go.
Yeah, I'd certainly echo that. We certainly have a long way to go, but I think we have a great model, especially for American neighbors, to help them sort through the complexities of identity that are seemingly tearing the country apart right now. But with that, Sean, let's go to always the last question. What podcast, book, video, movie, or album have you enjoyed recently that you'd recommend to the audience?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me this one. Well, you know me, Jay, and you know that I am a sucker for all things music, and maybe I shared this with you before we were live on air. But I've been going down some YouTube black holes where you have a first-time listener experience a song that, for the most part, all of us are very familiar with. And so maybe I'll use a Canadian example where Burton Cummings, this famous Canadian singer, used to be with the Guess Who. And, watching a woman who was a vocal coach experience him hitting these notes for the first time. So this combination of enjoying the music that I love, often watching the actual performance of the music, and then someone react like maybe it is in fact the first time they've ever heard it. So I've been spending some time in that space and really enjoying it.
That's awesome. Michael McDonald is the one that has an amazing video of that that I recommend as well. So I appreciate that. Not many people give a musical recommendation, which I think I can always count on you to do. So with that, Sean, thank you very much for your time today.
Jay, it's been a pleasure as always, and hope we get to connect again very soon.
This podcast is recorded on the Territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Buccheri. Until next time.